the Spider-Man animation panel was very good. Like they had, I think, 4 different presenters from Insomniac, which is the panel. It could have got on for 10 hours. I mean, if you're really unpacking the animation of Spider-Man, but it was awesome just to see a ton of work in progress footage from the game's development. And there's just 1,000 things. And the reason why GDC rules is there's just 1,000 things in those panels that you just don't think of. Like, even as somebody who took notes throughout all of Spider-Man 2 and loves those games, it's like, oh, I hadn't really considered this. But just the idea of one of the animators was talking about the challenges of having so much American Sign Language in Spider-Man 2, which was in Miles Morales a bit, but there was so much more with the character of Haley in Spider-Man 2, and the fact that, like, okay, we need to have deaf performers be mocap body doubles because the voice actors aren't going to be able to sign this well. So like, and then on top of that, just capturing that, then animating the hands, hand animating the hands for all of those sign language scenes. It was just a monumental task. And so also on the motion capture front, there's just basic stuff that I didn't think of like, okay, the way we found for this to be most efficient is we have the voice actors on the mocap stage doing the performances, you know, fighting Kraven, all this stuff. But then we have stunt doubles who can actually do like the Spider-Man flips and the more physical stuff. They're also doing those exact performances right next to the voice actors, which is such a weird idea. So then the idea is the animators can pick and choose which animations to use at which point. But having the voice actors there delivering the lines in the same space as these stunt performers, like it lets the stunt performers react to the voices a little bit more. But then they're talking about the challenge of, well, you're capturing the audio from these, so you're picking up a lot of audio from the stunt performers on the official things. So it's trying to like work out that system of, and I trust Insomniac, they're so wildly efficient in the game industry at this point, but the fact that they're like, we found out to be the best way to go is just have 2 sets of performances at all times throughout that entire game, not to mention then the ASL stuff on top of that. But I was so thankful they had a whole section of the panel talking about the Sandman opening fight, which is so awesome in that game. And again, this thing could have been a 5-hour discussion just talking about that Sandman fight. But they were talking about, like, for a character that big, you obviously need to have him be slow so it feels more impactful, and that's probably accurate to physics, right? Big things move slow.
I always wonder, like, are we slow to ants? Is that just a thing movies taught me?
I don't know.
I know.
Yes. So the point is, they said that they needed to slow Sandman down to 75%.
Wow.
But when you're playing as a Spider-Man, you are going so much faster than humans. And so it was apparently a real big challenge to have that boss fight be engaging at all, because if you're going at Spider-Man speed, which is what, maybe 150% at least of normal human speed, and you're going up against something at 75% human speed, like it's just the easiest thing to dodge everything and just destroy him. And so the challenge was like, okay, we need to have Sandman calibrate where you're going to be, and the most efficient move he can do that feels fair but not too cheap, but you can still dodge it, yada, 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 is he does these big sweeping arm movements. But like they showed the math that he has to do to find the right area to try and do those sweeping arm movements. And they also talked about just the challenges, obviously, of like that big moment of throwing Miles across basically all of New York City, if you remember that. It's so incredible. And just the challenge of populating the city with pedestrians and cars as all of that's happening was monumental. And also they talked about, QuickTime events, which, you could have varying opinions on those, but just having the animator talk about the challenges of like, all right, his job is to design the QuickTime events of Spider-Man 2. And so many of those were coming in hot, being reworked the last second, like the last boss fight and stuff like that. All that stuff was being reworked really late in the process.
Yeah.
But also talking about, they found with Miles Morales in particular, the sweet spot for QuickTime events is to fail forward, so that even if you miss the QuickTime event, it's not a game over. It's just there's a different animation as you progress. And so you factor in all of those alternatives paths that you could go through for Spider-Man 2 and those QuickTime events. It's just a ton of animation work that probably won't be seen by anybody. And then last thing about Spider-Man 2 is, it was great just hearing the questions that other animators were asking them during the Q&A, because every panel ends with like developer Q&A and stuff. And one developer got up and they're just like, how do you do the transitions between gameplay and cutscenes? Like, it just blows my mind that those can be smooth transitions like that. And they're like, oh, it's just a lot of trial and error. We eventually got there. And they're like, ultimately, it helps to have a picture of where the gameplay starts. And you can show that on an iPad to the actors as they're performing, so they know that they have to end their scene in this pose on the rooftop, because that's where the gameplay is going to engage. And the closer you get to that while you're recording, it's so much easier. You just don't have to fudge it after the fact in animation.
On an iPad.
Right, yeah. So it was a fascinating talk. And Insomniac they're doing a lot of talks for Spider-Man 2, which is great to see Sony get out there and share some secrets of this whole thing.
Neat. That was just a clip from our Patreon exclusive podcast, Bonus Pod.
You can unlock Bonus Pod each and every week by supporting MinnMax at the $5 tier. It's Haley and different cohorts rotating around, talking about anything and everything under the sun. If you're looking for a more casual piece of content from MinnMax than the uptight MinnMax show with all those squares, you can unlock Bonus Pod in your favorite podcast app at the $5 tier on Patreon, and you help support independent games media at the same time. So if you enjoyed this clip, there's a whole lot more GDC talk and a whole lot more beyond that by unlocking Bonus Pod in your favorite podcast app. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Thanks so much, everybody.